Okay, the Village of Bartlett was established in 1873 by Luther and Sophia Bartlett with the donation of land to the Chicago and Pacific Railroad for a rail right-of-way and the building of a depot. The Bartletts settled in DuPage County in 1844, and they owned more than 700 acres of land, with this Cook County portion serving as their woodlot. In 1891, Bartlett incorporated and elected a village president and 6 trustees sworn to uphold the Constitution of the United States and handle the governmental affairs of the village. The village board spent that first year in sessions writing ordinances that defined our community and dealt with the issues of the day, such as animals running at large through the streets, the licensing of saloons, creating the position of a police magistrate, and many more. But on April 23rd, 1892, the board turned its attentions to a more solemn task, that being the establishment of a village-owned cemetery. Today, we're going to learn about the processes and decisions that were made through the years regarding this final resting place. So on April 23rd, 1892, then village president George Struckman appointed trustees John Carr, August C. Schick, and Charles F. Schultz to the newly formed cemetery committee. They were charged to find a suitable piece of ground. So who were these key players in the cemetery's establishment? Well, they were the village board of trustees as a whole, with the 3 trustees appointed to serve on the cemetery committee. George Struckman was the village's first and 3rd village president, and the only one to serve 2 separate terms, and to date the longest serving village president for a total of 18 years. Now, he was a real political mover and shaker. Struckman was the leading politician in the state's Republican Party. He led the move for the village's incorporation, signing the filing petition and such. And he also held elected offices in state government, county, and township, and of course, local government. Now, trustee August C. Schick, one of the members of the cemetery committee, was a longtime Bartlett resident. He was born in 1858 in Bloomingdale. He was an area builder, most noted for constructing Emmanuel United Church of Christ on the corner of Western and North Avenues, Bartlett's oldest continuing house of worship. He also operated a general store in Bartlett, once located on Railroad Avenue. He served on the village board from 1891 to 1899. Trustee John C. Carr was born in New York State in 1834. His family relocated to this area in 1838. Carr built the second home in Bartlett, that being in the fall of 1873, shortly after the village's establishment. He was a deacon at Bartlett's Congregational Church and an ardent member of the temperance movement. He served as a trustee from 1891 to 1894. Trustee Charles F. Schultz was born in Germany in 1833. He immigrated to the United States where he was a farmer. He served in several elected positions for Hanover Township, which included supervisor, collector, and assessor. In 1891, He's elected a village trustee and serves to 1899 when he becomes village president, serving until 1901. His family was one of the charter members of Emmanuel United Church of Christ. On May 6, 1892, the committee wrote this report, which stated in part, after careful examination and investigations of several locations, we concluded to recommend the 6 acres of Henry Waterman, which lay north of North Avenue between the lands of Henry Crumpus and Henry Nevish. The price H. Waterman is asking for said land is $200 per acre for less than the whole piece, or $1,000 for the whole piece of 6 acres. Your committee is of the opinion that it would be profitable for the village to buy the whole 6 acres. Notice this handwritten document on notebook paper. The museum has many original documents in relation to the cemetery, which you'll see throughout this presentation, thanks to George Brennan. George worked for the village from 1965 to 1999 in the Public Works Department. In 1968, when the original village hall was being raised, he was told to throw out all the old paperwork that dated back to 1891 by the then village president. Realizing their historic value, George instead took the documents home, saying nothing. He has since donated everything back to the museums, and he truly saved Bartlett history for future generations. In 2002, he was honored by the museums as a Bartlett treasure at a village board meeting. Now, the annual appropriations for the fiscal year 1892 to 1893, Ordinance 33, approved on May 9th, included the $1,000 for the purchasing of the ground and an additional $225 for the platting and fencing and maintaining the cemetery, for a total of $1,225. That same evening, the board approved issuing $100 bonds with an interest rate of 6%, totaling $1,000 to complete the purchase. At the bottom of the bond, you'll see the signature of George Struckman. On June 4th, a resolution filed directing the village clerk to pay Henry Waterman the sum of $1,000 for the ground. Waterman was a contractor and a carpenter who built many of the homes in Bartlett and surrounding area. And the check was written. Notice at that time, Bartlett was solely located in Cook County. It wasn't until 1959 that we annexed into DuPage County. And today, Bartlett also sits in Kane County. On September 5th, 1892, Trustee John Carr introduced Ordinance number 38, defining in detail the village cemetery. Containing 21 sections, this ordinance outlined the village's graveyard, now officially known as the Bartlett Cemetery, as stated in Section 1. Section 9 created the position of village sexton, the person responsible for all aspects of the cemetery, such as keeping the grounds free from obstructions, selling plots, and reporting to the village clerk the name and the age of the persons buried by plot. The sexton could also hire a person who shall be designated as a grave digger. The fee for burying a person younger than 10 years old was $1.50. and older than 10 was $3. Section 17 forbid burial without the proper authorization of the plot owner. The fines for that were not less than $20 or more than $200. The cemetery at that time was laid out in a concentric pattern of 13 blocks, which you can see in the image here, with a potter's field along the entire eastern edge. The postcard pictured here is one of the oldest images of the cemetery in the museum's collection. Section 8 of Ordinance 38 required the village clerk to maintain a cemetery record book to document the lots purchased and the price paid. After the burial, it was the job of the sexton to report to the clerk the name, age, and lot and block in which the deceased was buried. The information was also registered in the book, which today is in the museum's collection. The book cost $1, which was reimbursed to clerk Stump. That's the check you see there in the bottom left-hand corner. According to the cemetery record book, the first lots were purchased by August C. Schick, one of the members of the cemetery committee. He bought the lot to bury his infant son, George E. Schick, who was 1 year, 9 days at the time of his death. Baby George is the first burial to be recorded in the cemetery book. The second burial was also an infant, William Preem. The Elgin Advocate newspaper of October 29, 1892 stated, Union services were held by the German and Congregational churches. The cemetery is nicely located on a rise of ground just west of town. While the German church is on the left, today known as Emmanuel United Church of Christ, and it's still standing today at North and Western Avenues. It is Bartlett's oldest continuing congregation, chartered in 1891 by the village's German residents who wanted a house of worship in Bartlett instead of traveling to Hoosier Grove, today Streamwood, or Ontarioville, today Hanover Park. The Congregational Church, Bartlett's first house of worship, on the right, began in 1878 on land donated by Luther and Sophia Bartlett. It was located on the southwest corner of Oneida and Hickory Avenues. The church closed in 1917, with the building eventually being used as the warehouse for Thurno and Crumpus, an implement dealership, and later Bartlett Implement Company before it was razed. The first adult third burial, according to the record book, was Reverend Gustav Hageman, 58 years old. His wife bought the lot on November 7th, 1892. The Reverend had passed away on April 25th, 1892. He was the first minister of Emmanuel United Church of Christ and was said to have been a strong advocate for a cemetery in Bartlett. According to his obituary, supplied to the museum by Eden Theological Seminary, and I quote, he was struggling with pneumonia, became bedridden, and passed one day just before he had the privilege to attend the installation of the new church in the neighboring community of the small town of Bartlett. 14 pallbearers carried him from his home in Ontarioville to the grave site for the service on April 28th, end of quote. But there are some discrepancies. According to Emmanuel's records, the church was dedicated on March 13th, 1892, and Reverend Hageman was very much present and read the history of the congregation of that day. Both sources agree the Reverend died on April 25th, 1892, But if Bartlett Cemetery didn't formally exist until that May, and his wife didn't buy the plot until November, where was he buried on April 28th? Some have said the Reverend was buried on the property of the church, though in the church records shared with the museum, it stated he is buried in Bartlett Cemetery. So where was the Reverend? Was the Reverend reinterred? At this point, we're still researching. At the February 3rd, 1894 board meeting, a total of $37.50 was approved to be drawn from the cemetery fund. William Schwanke was paid $4.60. The Marco brothers were given $10.20. M. Golsky, $4. Ernest Schwanke, $4. Charles Denham, $3.50, and $6 given to John Marple for goods and services. And here on the left, you'll see some of the checks that were written. One including to August John for straps. And the straps were used to lower the coffin into the grave. And the top check is for seeds for the cemetery, most likely grass seed. There are some early financial facts about the cemetery. In 1904, a motion was made by Trustee Krause that a portion of the cemetery not being used to be rented to Fred Kosemark for a year for $2.50. Oh, and that motion was approved. For the fiscal year 1912 to 1913, $200 was budgeted for the cemetery based upon the total village operating budget of $2,600. In 1902, the amount was only $50 given to the cemetery, with the total village operating budget of $1,880. On November 11th, 1939, then called Armistice Day, today Veterans Day, a civil project came to culmination with the dedication of the flagpole at the cemetery. Irene Schultz, pictured here on the left, then president of the Bartlett Women's Club, the village's oldest civic organization, made the presentation of the pole to then village president Alfred Sodman on the right. The ceremony included American Legion posts from Elgin and Itasca, since Bartlett had no post of its own at that time. Music included a drum and bugle corps and a quartet singing God Bless America and America for Me. As available cemetery lots became limited, steps were taken to assure residents would have the first option to purchase the remaining ones. In 1969, an ordinance approved stating the sale of lots being restricted to residents of the village or owners of real estate subject to taxation therein. It was also set the price for lots at $2 per square foot until a new price could be established by the, quote, corporate authorities. On June 4th, 1996, Ordinance 96-49 was approved, raising the rates of lots to $5 a square foot. Resolution 2003-127R, approved on September 16, 2003, detailed the rulings that define cemetery terminology, such as grave and lot, but also specifies concerning memorial markers, plantings, decorations, and more. This resolution established a consistent standard, such as no more than 3 objects on any one grave, and the size and placement of tombstones. It also prohibits chairs, tables, settees, glass objects, shepherd's hooks, and all other objects that pose a safety hazard not to be placed in the cemetery. A potter's field is a portion of land set aside for burial of the unknown, unclaimed, and those who can't financially purchase a lot. When the cemetery was established, a potter's field portion was included and ran the entire length of the eastern side. In the original cemetery book, 4 people are listed as being buried within that section. On June 5th, 2007, a motion was approved directing the Public Works Department to open up for purchase the last and final section in Bartlett Cemetery. At that time, only individual lots were available throughout the cemetery. The final easterly portion, historically earmarked as Potter's Field, was equal to approximately 130 lots, which could accommodate residents seeking continuous lots for family members. A small portion of Potter's Field remains and is located at the entrance on the east side. Today, there are no available lots for sale to residents. However, at times, people return unwanted lots back to the village and are reimbursed for the amount they paid. The lot becomes available again for purchase. Now, people can sell their unwanted lots directly to others, but they do have to be sold only to Bartlett residents. Bartlett Cemetery is the final resting place for some of our pioneer men and women, business owners, civic volunteers, elected officials, veterans, children, generations of several families, and more. Each is a person with their own unique life story, no matter how brief. As of May 1st, 2021, there are 1,410 people buried in the cemetery. 6 of our village presidents are buried there. Charles F. Schultz died in 1908. Again, he was Bartlett's 2nd village president. He was also a village trustee, and remember, he was a member of the cemetery committee. George Struckman died in 1920. Again, he was our 1st and 3rd village president, led the incorporation procedures, but he also wrote the bylaws for the fire department. John J. O'Brien, a cattle dealer, died in 1928 while in office, having served 17 years as village president from 1911 to 1928. He was the first village president to die in office. A special election was held that May, with Ben Schultz being the only candidate for that position. Schultz was the son of Charles F. Schultz, who previously held the position of village clerk for 24 years. He was a highway commissioner, a trustee for the Bartlett State Bank, and a member of the Masonic Lodge. And he once worked in the feed and lumber business. In 1932, Schultz, age 65, became the 2nd consecutive village president to die in office after John J. O'Brien. John Buetling, an accountant for the Milwaukee Road, resigned from the office of village president in 1963 because of ill health. He was elected in 1957. During his tenure, Bartlett began its growth, with Buetling saying, "I think Bartlett will see quite an expansion in the next couple of years," and how right he was. Buetling died in 1980 at the age of 87. William Bill Tickness is the most recent village president to be buried in Bartlett Cemetery, having passed away in 2017. Tickness served first as a village trustee and was elected president from 1973 to 1977. During his tenure, the nation and Bartlett celebrated the bicentennial, and he began the efforts to save Bartlett Hills Golf Club from being developed into a massive subdivision. He was one-time supervisor of Hanover Township, was a charter member of the Rotary Club, and also a charter member of then Bartlett Chamber of Commerce. Now let's talk a little bit about the formation and the starting of Memorial Day. On May 5th, 1868, John A. Logan, a Civil War veteran, helped form the Grand Old Army of the Republic, the GAR, of which Bartlett's George Struckman was a member. In 1968, as GAR's commander, Logan issued General Order Number 11, establishing Decoration Day, today known as Memorial Day. The date of Decoration Day, as he called it, was chosen because it didn't celebrate the anniversary of any particular battle of the Civil War. But General Logan was also an Illinois state representative, and there's a Bartlett connection tied in with that. Later, he was a Illinois U.S. Senator, serving from 1871 until 1877, and again from his death until 1879. In his re-election bid in 1885, it was very heated. And at that time, United States senators were not elected by the general public. Each state's U.S. senator was chosen by its General Assembly. Due to political infighting between parties in 1885, the voting process continued for 171 days and 120 ballots. On May 19th, the election process ceased with Logan winning 103 votes. And this is a picture that we have in our collection here. George Struckman, which is the light green circle at the top. He was a state representative at the time, serving in Springfield. He was one of the ones to vote for General Logan, who is circled there in the blue. For decades, Memorial Day continued to be observed on May 30th, the date Logan had selected for the first Decoration Day. But in 1968, Congress passed the Uniform Monday Holiday Act, which established Memorial Day as the last Monday in May in order to create a 3-day weekend for federal employees. And the change went into effect in 1971. And that same law also declared Memorial Day a federal holiday. Well, the idea of Memorial Day was to celebrate those who died in service to their country while in service in defense of the country. And in Bartlett Cemetery is the resting place for 2 such members, service members who did die in defense of our country. The first one is Wendell P Hayes. He was born in Bartlett in 1895. He attended Bartlett School where his father, Harry P. Hay, was principal. Sometime after his father's death in 1902, Hay and his mother, Amanda, moved to Elgin. In 1917, Hay, an agricultural major at the University of Missouri, entered the Army and attended the first officers training camp at Camp Funkston, Fort Riley, Kansas. While there with the 89th Division, 354th Infantry, he was promoted to first lieutenant. On June 4th, 1918, Hayes sailed to France, where he was quickly promoted to the rank of captain. In a morning raid on September 9th, Hay was killed by enemy grenade during heavy barrage. Now, the body of Captain Hay returned home to Bartlett for final burial in July 1921. And he was laid to rest in Bartlett Cemetery alongside his father. The service was conducted by the Elgin Masonic Lodge and the American Legion. And the remains of fallen World War I servicemen took years to return home, if at all. Transport ships were filled with returning living servicemen at first. And by the end of 1921, the United States had shipped almost 46,000 war dead home. His Gold Star mother, Amanda Hay Gullick, was interned in the family plot upon her passing in 1959. Gold Star mothers are women entitled to display a gold star on the service flag as the mother, stepmother, adoptive mother, or foster mother of a United States Armed Forces member that died while engaged in action against an enemy recognized by the State Department of Defense. And if you see on his headstone there, the words after his date and his rank, he heard the call of death on honors field and answered here. A 231-acre farm in Wayne Township was the home to farmer William C. Schrader, his parents and siblings. Schrader entered the service in World War I on September 5th, 1918, and died from the flu at training camp on November 25th, 1918. The 1918 flu pandemic struck quickly, with many dying in days or even hours. While the flu of today is most dangerous to children and the elderly, the 1918 pandemic struck many young and healthy people, including servicemen. The mass movement of men in armies and camps and aboard ships aided that virus in its rapid worldwide spread. And some historians estimate that half of all US soldiers who fell to the virus. And there are other non-military personnel who died from the 1918 pandemic and are buried in Bartlett Cemetery as well. His Gold Star mother, Matilda, is also buried in the family plot, and she was just recently recognized as a Gold Star mother after research by the History Museum, noting that she should be included. The earliest date that Bartlett residents celebrated and marked Decoration or Memorial Day in Bartlett Cemetery is not known. Early newspaper articles mention residents celebrating Decoration Day by spending time with their family and friends. What we have to remember is it appears that William Schrader was the first service member to be buried in the cemetery, and that was in 1918, with Hayes' body being interred in 1921. George Struckman, the cemetery's only Civil War veteran, died and was buried there in 1920. So prior to that time, there were no veterans buried within or graves to decorate. The Tri-Village Memorial Service Organization was formed in 1958 with the villages of Bartlett, Streamwood, and Hanover Park joining together to organize a remembrance event. One tradition was the parade, which stepped off from Bartlett Park and proceeded west on North Avenue to the cemetery. Veterans in uniforms or not were welcome to march in the parade along with Boy and Girl Scout troops from the three communities. And at the cemetery, honors were rendered to the dead. And here you see the images on the top left are the Boy Scouts marching down North Avenue. They're marching toward the west. And then the image down below is the parade coming into the cemetery, and you're looking at, again, coming down on North Avenue here, heading to the west. By the late 1970s, the parade route was altered and lengthened. Participants now gathered in the parking lot of the Bartlett State Bank, today BMO Harris Bank, located on Main Street, and later in the parking lot of Bartlett Plaza, today the streets of Bartlett. The parade route was Devon Avenue to Main Street, to Oak Avenue, then to North Avenue, and west into the cemetery. Children were encouraged to decorate their bikes, and some parents drove their sporty cars. In 1983, the parade featured the Silver Knights Drum and Twirling Corps, the Medina Highlanders, Wayne Township Mounted Patrol, and more, with a reviewing stand in front of the Village Hall. The Bartlett JC sponsored the bicycle decorating contest with ribbons given to winners in 5 different categories. And there you see some of the decorated bicycles in the parking lot of the former Bartlett State Bank. And at the bottom are members of the Bartlett Women's Club, and they're marching along Main Street there with the AT&T building in the background. And of course, the Girl Scouts, and then the ceremonies happening in the cemetery at the top right. In recent history, The annual walk, not a parade, to the cemetery has returned, with the village being the sole sponsor. In the early 1990s, full-size American flags on poles bearing the plaques with the names of veterans and Gold Star mothers buried within began gracing the roadway and paths in center circle throughout the cemetery for the holiday weekend. Veterans' graves were also decorated with small American flags. This tribute was brought to Bartlett after then cemetery sexton George Brennan saw it at Bluff City Cemetery and knew it would be a fitting tribute and that it should be brought to Bartlett. Another newer addition to the walk is the flag retirement ceremony at Bartlett Park, sponsored by Bartlett's American Legion Post 1212, prior to the step-off. Scouts and civic groups and other organizations join in the procession, which once again steps off from Bartlett Park, and attendees can watch from the curb or join in the walk. Once everyone has gathered around the central flagpole in the cemetery center, the flag raising and lowering to half-staff by the color guard takes place. Wreaths are placed around the flagpole by members of the auxiliary to Bartlett VFW Post 11018. After the invocation and remarks, the names of the veterans and Gold Star mothers are read. The cannons of Battery G, 2nd Illinois Light Artillery, fired 3 shots. Next, a bagpipe rendition of Amazing Grace, followed by a closing prayer, after which a 21-gun salute by members of the VFW Post 11018 and American Legion Post 1212 takes place. And the playing of taps concludes the remembrance. This yearly solemn ceremony continues to pay tribute to those who have served our country and rest in Bartlett Cemetery. As of May 1st, 2021, 234 veterans and 3 Gold Star mothers are buried within. To further recognize their service on a perpetual basis beyond Memorial Day, the Village of Bartlett is creating an interactive cemetery map to be available on the village's website by Memorial Day 2021. The veterans and Gold Star mothers' names will be searchable, show grave location, and veterans branches service. The Bartlett History Museum will be providing images and additional information on the veterans and Gold Star mothers that is already in the museum's collection. And we're just going to take a look here at, very quickly, some of the veterans that are buried here in the cemetery. Alvin Crumpus, top left, and beneath him, George Wendell. Those were 2 lifelong Bartlett residents, both in World War I. Below here on the left-hand side, the 2 gentlemen in the Navy. The top is Basil Doc Ping, and below is Melbourne Mel Atchison. Both were longtime Bartlett residents and Naval World War II veterans, along with Frank Bucaro, whose military headstone you see here at the top. Also buried in the cemetery in the middle, top here, second in from the right, is longtime resident Walter Wally Velasic. He was a member of the Merchant Marines, and Donald Baxman, who was in the Army, along with Elmer Heck, that you see down here on the bottom right, who was also in the Army in World War II. So we're real excited about this project and working with our GIS department on this, again, to help honor the veterans and remember the veterans that are buried in Bartlett Cemetery. So we have a couple did you knows here about Bartlett Cemetery. Well, the Cook County Herald reported in the May 30th, 1942 edition that the Civic Committee of the Bartlett Women's Club asked for donations of shrubs to be used to beautify the village cemetery. In 1967, the cemetery's 75th anniversary, the board agreed to purchase 12 oak trees for the cemetery at the cost of $10 each. In 1977, a new fence was to be erected around the cemetery, and the type of fence was the debate of the day. Eleanor Schwacke, a member of the Golden Ages, was quoted by saying to the local newspaper, there should be a chain link fence to keep vandals out. She went on to elaborate, we want to protect it from dogs and children and young people who go there at night and park. Local homeowners felt differently. Williamsburg Drive resident Lois Holliday didn't want a fence at all. She felt it would be, quote, an eyesore and could hurt the resale value of our home. Quoted as having respect for the dead, Holliday preferred a split rail type fence rather than the stockade feel of a chain link. The village received a $7,850 anonymous donation for the fence project. The board appointed a citizens committee to ensure a tasteful and acceptable selection of materials within financial constraints. Now, there used to be pine trees once graced the entrance at the cemetery, and they're pictured here on the left and right side. They were donated, one from Bill Tickness and one from Roland O'Brien. They used the Christmas trees in their home and then brought them over for planting at the entrance. Unfortunately, both trees, the one on the left side crashed during a storm, and the other one got disease. And both trees have been removed and been replaced with new leafing trees. Well, we always get the question about how many members of the Bartlett family are buried in Bartlett Cemetery? Well, as of May 1st, 2021, there are no members of the Bartlett family buried in Bartlett Cemetery. Some of the members of the family, including Luther Bartlett, were first buried in Wayne Cemetery off of Smith Road and reburied at Bluff City Cemetery in Elgin in 1904 after the loss of 2 members of their family in the Iroquois Theater fire.